Hello everyone and welcome to our session this afternoon. How can FinTechs accelerate Ireland's ambition to become a sustainable finance leader by 2025? It is with particular pride that I'm opening this session, as it also marks the formal launch of the Irish Sustainable Finance FinTech Strategy. This is a document that is a result of a cross-industry collaboration that started almost a year ago and sits under Action 10 within Ireland's Sustainable Finance Roadmap. My name is Michael Concannon and I work with the FinTech and Payments Association of Ireland. We are a trade association representing a broad church of companies and individuals interested in the activity of FinTech. Our membership is broad and includes domestic and international banks, big techs and little techs, legal and advisory firms such as PwC, who will be meeting soon, peer organisations in other countries, and of course FinTechs of all shapes and sizes. We also work with many partner organisations such as Enterprise Ireland, IDA, academia, and, I'm delighted to say on this particular occasion, Sustainable Finance Ireland. It is the case that the FPAI shares a roof with the BPFI, which represents the domestic banks here in Ireland, and the Federation of the International Banks in Ireland, which is fantastic. It gives us an opportunity to bring those parties together over areas of common interest for common good. And it is on the note of common good that sustainable finance has become a major and shared focal point. In fact, in a survey last year conducted by BPFI of its members, participants were asked to identify the single most important issue for them as they looked to the future. Now, traditionally, the answer to such a question would have been regulations, or AML, or open banking, or PSD2, cyber, talent, government policy, whatever. But this time, the number one item identified was overwhelmingly sustainable finance. So following discussions with Sustainable Finance Ireland and PwC, I had the privilege of standing here on this very same spot on October 14th, 2021, during Climate Finance Week, to announce the creation of the Sustainable Finance FinTech Working Group. Jointly chaired by Colette Coogan of Sustainable Finance Ireland and the FPAI, with fantastic support from Emer Lokman and Laura Flood of PwC, we started a series of roundtables, presentations, keynotes, one-to-ones and plenary sessions to formulate a strategy to ensure that FinTech can support the opportunity that Ireland has to champion the development of world-class FinTech solutions to address sustainable finance and nature-related challenges. The group we formed was drawn from across the industry and included domestic and international banks, academia, FinTechs, policymakers, international experts, technology companies and semi-state agencies, including the aforementioned IDA and Enterprise Ireland. To each and all of you, we thank you for your contributions and support in getting us this far. I was really struck by the amount of expertise, the commitment and the strong spirit of cooperation that prevailed throughout the process. We will hope to lean into that again for the next phase of the strategy, so you're not going anywhere yet. Looking at the strategy paper from a height, two aspects, at least for me, stand out. One, we are at the start of a journey with much work to do to achieve the goals set out on the paper. That is not to say that no work has already been done. Examples we have witnessed including the significant made already by incumbent financial institutions and agencies like IFS Skillnet, which has already invested heavily in devising new courses to help meet the demand for talent that the strategy will require. The second aspect that struck me, and it is clear and apparent throughout the actual document, is that to make progress, collaboration within the industry is essential. We see no way that a bank or a tech company or a FinTech will meet the challenges alone or shift the dial in any significant way. And by industry, we mean banks, FinTechs, policymakers, regulators, technology companies and stakeholders such as Sustainable Finance Ireland. To help frame and articulate the strategy, we devised 5 pillars. Nurturing the ecosystem, back to that strand of collaboration, enabling environment, capability and talent. I was at an event recently actually that IFS Skillnet spoke at, and they did say that they have seen a noticeable appetite from new graduates who want to deepen their knowledge in this sphere, so opportunity to be tapped into there. Access to capital, show me the money, and finally data, a term that was much used and abused during our formulations, but one that will be central to moving this strategy forward. But to hear more insights and perspectives on the strategy paper from leading industry practitioners and thought leaders, I am delighted to hand over to Laura Flood, partner in PwC, and whose passion and determination played no small part in getting us here, who will host the chat. So I'll hand over straight to you now, Laura. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you for that introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted you can join us today for panel discussion on sustainable finance in FinTech. So as Michael said, my name is Laura Flood. I'm a banking partner in PwC, and I'm also a council member of the FinTech and Payments Association of Ireland. So I'm grateful to work very closely with Michael and Ruth on developing the FinTech agenda here in Ireland. So before handing over to our fantastic panel, and while everyone says they have a fantastic panel, I have a fantastic panel for you this afternoon. Just wanted to set some context for our discussion this afternoon. As Michael's outlined, this week we see the publication of Ireland's first Sustainable Finance FinTech Strategy, and I suppose that's really important to us for a number of reasons. Sustainable finance has been top of agenda and getting to the top of agendas across the full range of financial services for the past number of years, and this being the 5th Climate Finance Week is testament to that very fact. However, there's a very important intersection of fintech and sustainable finance that we really wanted to focus on, and really want to use our great financial services capability and our great fintech capability here in Ireland to work together to help deliver on this really important agenda. As Michael said, I think the most important thing that came through was, I suppose, the spirit of collaboration as we sat down to address that narrow intersection of those two worlds. And I suppose key to the action points that came out in our action plan is the focus on collaboration and how those will be delivered collaboratively by fintech financial services, academia and beyond as we work through these. So I'll hand over to the panel now for some introductions and we can get cracking. So Ruth, I'll hand over to you first, please, for introduction.
Hi, I'm Ruth McCarthy. I'm the head of FEXCO Corporate Payments. I'm also the chair of the FinTech and Payments Association, so I'm delighted to be here.
My name is Mark Jordan. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at SkillNet Ireland. For those of you that don't know, SkillNet Ireland is the National Agency for Talent Development, and we're delivering talent development initiatives to all sectors of industry within Ireland.
Good afternoon, I'm Corinne Neal from BNY Mellon, and I have been working for the past couple of years on helping our clients develop digital solutions to address a range of problems, but in particular sustainable finance problems. And I've been asked to extend this mission to all of the products that we are delivering to make sure that we support the sustainable finance agenda of our clients, and I'm delighted to be here.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Holmes and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at AIB, and I also chair the Sustainable Finance SkillNet, one of the SkillNets that Mark mentioned.
Hi, I'm Johnny Mattimore. I'm at First Derivative. I lead our risk and sustainable finance business. I'm particularly involved in solving the data problem, how to automate everything from carbon emissions to, when we get to it, nature and societal risk data. And I'm particularly focused on trying to stimulate open source solutions in this domain.
Brilliant, thank you. And Johnny, looking forward to picking up on that shortly. Ruth, I suppose over to you first. I mean, from your perspective as, I suppose, chair of the FPAI Council, you're a member of the government's IAC and also through your day job, which is busy enough in terms of CEO of FEXCO Corporate Payments. I mean, when you look at the strategy, I suppose, what's your perspective on it and where do you see Ireland in terms of the global role?
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for Ireland. I think that's possibly the reason why the outcome of this working group is part of both the Sustainable Finance Strategy and also the Ireland for Finance Strategy for Growth. We're well positioned because we're a small country. We have a small ecosystem which we know we can build effectively. There's a high concentration of skills here. We've proven that we can punch above our weight in certain industries. For example, the success we've had with the funds industry over decades. All of those things coming together mean that we're well positioned for an area of finance that's experiencing rapid change and requires significant input, both at the policy level and the technology level. So if you look across other financial centers and jurisdictions, and you ask, how are those necessary ingredients present and how well do they combine, I don't think there's anywhere to beat Ireland.
Perfect, thanks. Yvonne, just turning to you next, I mean, through the strategy development process, we saw incredible engagement between financial services and fintechs, and we have some really, really great discussions already that we can take forward into the execution of the strategy. But I suppose AIB's been leading out on this for many years. So from your perspective, I mean, where do you see the opportunities for fintechs for you as you work through the various challenges and opportunities that this presents to you as a big financial institution?
Yeah, so there's, I suppose, ESG data has been referred to already, and I think that's probably the biggest challenge that all organizations, and not just financial services institutions, have when it comes to meeting the ESG requirements. So, you know, if you think about data, it's required for disclosures, for assessing risks, you know, for tracking progress against targets. So when you think of the challenges, so from a data perspective, you know, we need to understand our customers, counterparties, ESG credentials. We need to be able to capture data in relation to their emissions footprint to enable us to track our own emissions footprint. We need to be able to assess the risk, and you know, that's information about the counterparty, but also about their assets. So again, there's a huge data dependency in being able to, you know, categorize those assets and their level of risk. And then obviously there's a huge amount on the disclosure side. There's thousands of data points required across the range of regulatory requirements, but also the voluntary commitments that a lot of organizations have signed up to. So, you know, that provides challenges, but it also provides huge opportunities for fintechs and solution providers to come in and make that easier in terms of providing a kind of a one place for financial services, but also utility companies and other organizations to, you know, to be able to utilize that data. But also not just in terms of reporting, like if you think about the transition that needs to happen, you know, all organizations and customers are trying to navigate their way through the steps that they need to take to reduce their own emissions. So there's a big need for ecosystems to bring together finance, but also information and guidance, and suppliers, and you know, information on grants into an ecosystem. And that hasn't really developed at the pace you would expect, given the huge amount of opportunity that exists and the change that needs to happen in this space. And probably the other area then I think that there's opportunity for fintechs is on the impact side. So if we think about carbon trading, you know, that opportunity and market is potentially massive, you know, as more the demand for, we'll say, offsets grows, but also to encourage the development of green projects, you know, and getting a return for that is really critical in terms of the transition pathway that needs to happen. So there's a lot of challenges, but those challenges present massive opportunities that are only just growing in terms of scale and size over the next 10 to 30 years.
Thanks, Yvonne. And I think, Corinne, something that we spoke about in our planning for this session was, I suppose, your international view, and I suppose how you see it. And I suppose you have some very interesting perspectives to share with us as well in relation to how fintech can play a role in international sustainable finance.
Yes, I'm going to repeat some of the same themes, but I would like to emphasize three in particular where the role of fintech is critical. The first one, in relation to the data, clearly we need a lot of information in order to make the right decisions, the right risk decisions, the right opportunities. But one of the critical themes that is emerging internationally through every single survey, actually quite consistently, is the issue of lack of trust in the data that currently is available. Systematically, over the past 2 years, respondents have been saying, about 40% of respondents of any surveys have been saying that they do not trust the data that is put in front of them. So I would say one of the critical challenges that still needs to be resolved, and we need our brains to think about it, is to demonstrate that the data meets the particular purpose for which it is being used. Prove to me that your claims are working. Prove to me that whatever you are providing to me as a solution is meeting my sustainable climate finance need. So the first thing is around proof, is around demonstrability, especially as the world is focusing on impact investing. So I would say this is one area where I don't think anybody has cracked it yet, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done. The second path I wanted to emphasize is, how do you get to net zero? So many institutions, issuers, and investors have made commitment to net zero. How do you get there? I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in collaboration with universities and science in order to identify by industry what are appropriate solutions. And there's a role for fintech firms to actually bring this information about and make it consumable. The last area I want to emphasize, which is really important, is the dissemination of the information, the education, in particular in relation to financial advisors. What do financial advisors need in order to be able to channel the right information to all those retail investors who want to participate in the transition? So I would say those three areas are areas of real opportunities for fintech firms everywhere.
That, you know, the development, I suppose, could be further on. I suppose interested to see what, if any, Irish fintechs you've seen in this space. Well, you know, are you seeing many come through your doors in AIB looking to sell you solutions, or do you think we're still in the developing phase of this agenda?
Yeah, I think it's very early, but we're seeing, we'll say, carbon calculators is a common area. A lot of those are springing up in terms of, you know, personal usage and some business usage. We have seen some solutions coming up in terms of helping businesses understand where they are in their ESG journey and to identify the appropriate actions, and also then kind of a tool to help manage, you know, the actions that are federated across the company and organization, which is a useful solution. I mentioned about the carbon trading. I think they are starting to emerge and will grow in number. And in terms of the regulation side, I think just given the growing amount of regulations, I think we're starting to see solutions in that space. And actually, one of the areas that Sustainable Finance SkillNet provided funding for was to an open source solution that Johnny can talk to from First Derivatives perspective. And I suppose that probably is one of the biggest challenges in terms of organizations managing their disclosures. They're growing in breadth and depth, and being able to understand the overlap between all the different pieces of regulation is significant, and then obviously how you're mapping the data requirements to those. So that's a key one. We are seeing some kind of propositions, you know, rewarding customers for green activity. So whether that's an interest diverting or investing into kind of sustainable projects, that's another area. But I would say overall, to be honest, I am quite surprised that there aren't more solutions, and probably the biggest area that I keep looking out for and hoping for is that there'll be some solution provider in terms of that data capture in a consistent way to meet all those requirements where we're trying to engage with SMEs, because every organization has to engage with their customers and suppliers, and trying to get a solution that will do that in a kind of a painless way, although it'll never be painless for either party, but to try and do that in a kind of holistic way rather than bit solutions springing up all around. You know, that to me is a huge opportunity.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And actually, data was the key pain point that we discussed, I suppose, that and identifying the solution for the fintech perspective. So Johnny, Yvonne set you up beautifully there. I mean, you know, data is a standalone pillar in the strategy. I mean, it's a dominant theme as we look throughout the workshops. You know, it's the subject that we were talking to. I mean, as we look at the problem or opportunity, depending on where you sit, you know, how should we be looking at this? I mean, you know, this is something you spend a lot of time looking at. I know that you've got some stuff being launched later on in the week, but I mean, in terms of what, you know, you've done to date, and I suppose how you look at this, I mean, from a data perspective, what should we be thinking about?
Yes, we tend to try and break it down into a manageable problem. If I give you an example of some of the big international banks we've worked with and talked to, they have enormous resources thrown at sustainable finance, and they have enormous data science teams. But the amount of experimentation going on is enormous, but the amount of real-time productive work that is actually feeding into the business is really low. So you can go to a firm, you can find them spending 10 million on a data science pool, and you ask what's gone into production, and virtually nothing has gone into production. Now, when you look at what's happening on the regulation, you've actually got to deliver things at a ferocious pace. So take EBA Pillar 3, the first attempt to gather carbon emissions on borrowers and the collateral they pledge for banks. You know, those deadlines are coming thick and fast, starting the end of December this year. There is no use having 100 data scientists looking at that problem with no production delivery. So we've actually leaned on the FinTechs, who tend to have real point solutions. And that means they're really relevant to solving a critical issue now in the banking system. Now, if you take say a typical bank here in Ireland, they'll have a commercial lending book, a mortgage book, and maybe auto financing. So actually, you've got three quite different problems to solve, because the way that you approach each of these, they need slightly different data reuse. So a commercial book, you might just look at it pure carbon emissions. The mortgage book, you're going to need energy ratings, bear ratings, EPC, those types of things. And then when you look at the autos, you're going to need the data actually from the automobile manufacturing companies. So you can design an overarching solution, but what you've got to have is the flexibility for the nuances in each use case. Now, this is where FinTech partners are absolutely essential. And we've put together cohorts of 10, 20 FinTechs where they have very precise solutions. And that means we have a much better chance of solving an immediate problem today, rather than going to a generic technology firm that will go away and with a blank canvas say, well, we'll try and figure out how to solve your solution. So take mortgages today. There are some very sophisticated FinTechs in Ireland that can actually solve the problem of energy ratings and plugging the gaps with very sophisticated machine learning for energy ratings for properties that don't necessarily have that information readily at hand. What that means is that we can immediately go to the regulator and say, look, we have a path to compliance, we have a methodology, it's robust, and we can solve this portion of the bank's portfolio. Then we can move on to the next chunk of the portfolio and the next chunk. Now, the reason that's important is if you try and do all this at once, you're almost guaranteed to fail. But if you do it at a consistent pace and you keep biting it off, then you can probably keep going at a steady pace for 10 years, which is what this market's likely to do. It's not going to happen. We're not going to be doing this as a one-off exercise. So you've got to have this mentality of a steady pace, and picking off the right FinTechs allows you to do that steady pace.
Yeah, I think that's incredible insight, but also incredibly invaluable, I suppose, for FinTechs who are looking to get involved in this. Because I mean, some of the challenges we've had, you know, or some of the challenges that have been raised with us by FinTech is, I suppose, the issue's so big. Where do I start? What do I look at? So certainly that small part of the problem, fixing that is a key theme for people to be considering. Corinne, just really interested in your perspective on the data as well. I know it's something that you have a big focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would agree with a lot of what Johnny said. I think the experimentation is absolutely critical, and I think the ability to act quickly is critical. I would say that the role of a large financial institution is to define the problem clearly. And there are multiple problems that we're facing, we need resolving, and it's also our responsibility to prioritize it with our clients. So what I would say is that you need many teams of various diverse talent, and the FinTech industry can bring this velocity and this creativity and the ability to execute rapidly. And it's really important to have access to them. And occasionally, when they resolve a problem that is really critical for you, invest in them as well to support them. So I would say that there is a gigantic role with the FinTech firms to help resolve all of these data issues. Clearly, we're going to go beyond the data collection. We're going to move very quickly into the data integrity. How do you ensure that the data is reliable? How do you ensure that it's trustworthy and that it meets the purpose? And that's something that we need to address quickly. And we will address very also quickly the need for analytics that help price and prioritize and manage the risk that are being taken. So I think there is a lot still of work to do together with FinTech firms.
Great, thank you. And Mark, just turning to capability and talent, I mean, that was issue number 2 in terms of the work that we were doing around strategy development. So very, very, very top of agenda for people as they look into this space, or as they look to expand their knowledge, and both with financial services and fintechs part of that discussion. I mean, one of our key strengths is our deep expertise across both domains, but now we need to bring them closer together on this particular topic. How's SkillNet Ireland looking at this, or can you share your thoughts with us on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I think there's never been a shortage of attracting people into the broader financial services industry and its kind of peripheral sectors, and it's a very appealing career path for individuals, and whether you join an investment bank and get involved in the investment banking side or the sales and trading side, it's all been a very rewarding place to work. And I think that we continually see a strong appetite of individuals both leaving education and moving into the sector. We're looking at a lot of people and helping them in pathway programs coming from adjacent sectors and moving into financial services, into some fintech, regtech, insurtech type environments. And I think SkillNet Ireland really want to take a view on this and say that we'll take a position that this is very important. It speaks to our strategic agendas around enabling SMEs to be more productive, the digitalization of the workforce, helping our foreign direct investments companies grow, and obviously green skills and climate readiness is core for us also. So there is a number of different initiatives that we would run that will help individuals thrive as they pivot or as they explore upwardly mobile career paths within the sector and within companies, both either on the buy side or the sell side, depending on where they are. And I think that's been very successful for us. And we work very closely with industry participants, with academia, with government, and making sure that we're delivering the right pipeline of talent into what is a real growth sector. And not just to deliver it into companies, but helping companies understand that the talent they have is in fact their greatest asset and needs to be protected, nurtured, and developed. And making sure that encouraging companies to develop strategic talent plans for their leadership and the wider workforce to make sure they're constantly looking at improving their level of talent development and skill sets from within, and enabling the success of the organization, and really talking to leaders about financial objectives and what are the goals for the organizations, what are the key deliverables for the shareholders, and how do we develop together a talent program that helps enable that. And that's really key for SkillNet Ireland, not just to think about talent in the context of training courses, but in the context of a wider development plan for each respective organization, which serves the sector, which serves the economy, and really will make Ireland a kind of competitive global force in this space.
Thanks, Mark. Johnny, I suppose all this activity is going to need some funding. So I suppose, it's another challenge that we have spoken to as we work through this. I mean, fintechs looking to develop in this space, it costs a lot of time and money to look into something new. So the upfront cost can sometimes be perceived to be prohibitive to certain people looking at this. So I suppose just in terms of perspective on the funding environment, what's there, what's available to us. One of our action plan items is to specifically go and do some work on this and bring it together so that people have a one-stop shop for funding and they can see what is accessible and what's available. But again, just interested in your perspective on that, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Laura. The whole spectrum of funding is sometimes very confused. So at one extreme, you've got fundamental research. You have no idea what you're going to get for it. You get a government grant, you go and do the research, and it may actually turn out that you don't get anything that useful out of it. You might get a research paper. At the other extreme, you've got venture capitalists that are looking to fund things for very high multiples of return. And then the space in between can be quite confused. And one of the areas I think in this age is collaboration projects in between, can you bring together people that may traditionally have been competitors, or people which would be closed-minded about their proprietary work, and there is no threat to them by collaborating on a project. Now, the open source market is probably one of the best examples we have of this, but they tend to be based on people's goodwill. Now, if you directed even a small amount of funding at a small group, and you got the catalyst for them to create something big, the return on that investment can be quite colossal. Tomorrow we'll be talking a little bit about the taxonomy funding that First Derivative got from SkillNet. And it was a modest amount of funding, but the catalyst it's created at a partner group of circa 20 partners that are now coming together to collaborate in a way that was impossible even 2 years ago. They saw themselves as either competitors, or they saw themselves as only beholden to their shareholders on the VC side, where they've got to create IP, they've got to close that IP down, they can't have IP leakage. And at the other extreme, you've got all the academia funding. But if one can harness these two things and bring them together, you can probably see the venture capitalists creating many more unicorn firms, and you could see the research properly being deployed in real production environments. And I'd love to see those two ends of this spectrum come together and collaborate in more open source.
That makes a lot of sense, Johnny and Ruth. I mean, collaboration's such a key focus for us in the FPAI, so that's music to our ears, obviously. But you know, we've seen it work so successfully over the years, particularly through the FinTech Foresight Group, but also through, you know, the work we did on open banking at PSD2. So, you know, how important do you think collaboration is going to be for us to be successful on this agenda?
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely critical. And the preliminary work done just in terms of planning has created more collaboration within this industry, and I can see it in evidence here. There's broad agreement on the topics. The key players now know each other. They understand what type of role they want their counterparties to play in the environment. We have a good understanding of what we want the jurisdiction to achieve in sustainable finance. We understand the types of problems that we want FinTechs to solve. So you have this cohesion, you have everybody not merely going in the same direction, but knowing each other and all agreeing that they're going in the same direction, which is the critical enabler. So I'm sure people watching at home might have seen a lot of agreement across the panel. That doesn't arise out of nowhere. It arises out of extensive engagement. Likewise, appropriate skills development and education isn't something that you simply dream up. It requires a huge amount of collaboration and discussion and analysis in order to be delivered. So we've got all of these enablers in place. We've done the hard work of getting everybody coordinated. I'm very excited to see where we go to next. And just on the point of collaboration and on data, I want to just quickly mention the team in FEXCO are working on the platform for carbon emissions calculation for aviation. It's an example of exactly what everybody's been speaking about here, bringing together people in aircraft leasing and data analysts from a startup background. It's just one example of how the massive data problem in sustainable finance is being broken into edible chunks by FinTechs, who then collaborate really, really effectively with big players. And that's bringing us much closer to the verifiable and authentic data that industry needs to create credibility. So yeah, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who's been involved, and I'm very excited to see what we achieve next.
I think that's key. I mean, like, working through the strategy over the last number of months, I mean, it's been so interesting because everyone's not been focused on their own agenda. We've all been focused on getting the strategy lined up, which by definition, as you said, kind of arranges everybody behind the problem rather than, you know, scattered all over the place trying to do it in silos. So it's probably the actions being so collaborative and so intentionally collaborative has just been really, really good, and very much looking forward, as you said, to seeing what comes through. But Mark, I just want to pick up on a point that Johnny made just around research. I mean, you know, I know that's something that you spend a lot of time thinking about. So what's your view on research, I suppose, and how it will drive insights and innovation back out into industry?
Yeah, I think that research and insights will drive the relevant level of innovation within organizations, and it's kind of a necessary level of intelligence that is the catalyst for innovative ideas, and we see various different position papers and research papers that are produced that help spawn ideation in companies. And to Johnny's point earlier, one of the challenges is ideation not reaching production for various different reasons. And we're trying to figure out how do we combine research insights with talent development to shrink that gap, so more ideas get into production and get utilized by businesses and customers. And that's a key thing for us. And I think we're seeing a big position taken by Ireland here. Only yesterday, there was the announcement launch for the Sustainable Finance Centre of Excellence, which one of the things will be a core component of, which will be this repository of research and intelligence that will be shared and optimized and help drive programs, initiatives, product development, applied research initiatives, and various other things. And I think that's really the underpinning necessity for us to help drive businesses, and not only from a talent perspective, but from a business development perspective also. And so that will be really key as we go forward. And I'm really pleased that we've helped with the Sustainable Finance SkillNet and the IFS SkillNet and others enable this Centre of Excellence. And as it develops further, I think it will really put Ireland on the map as being this intelligence-centric organisation that sits within the country of Ireland, that's open to sharing and is a world leader in this particular space.
Thanks, Mark. And Corinne, we focused on Ireland, I suppose, given the strategy, but I suppose really want to understand your perspective. I mean, you see a huge range of things across your international role. I mean, are there any best practices or success stories, that we should be aware of as we look to execute on our strategy here?
So clearly you've heard today that we need a lot of innovation and we need a lot of collaboration across frontiers, across countries, across universities. I think one thing that has worked well internationally, especially in places like Singapore, has been the involvement of the public, the collaboration between public and private initiatives, in particular the establishment of grants, the Green Shoot program as an example of what Singapore has put in place to facilitate the acceleration of particular projects that are of importance to the industry. So participation of the public financing and also collaboration with universities. I think it's really important to have a really strong program in local universities. You see that in countries like the Netherlands, where it works extremely well, where you have labs, innovation labs being set up in universities that welcome fintech firms to come participate and provide their own expertise and their own technology. So I would say these are the two things I would emphasize, is the importance of collaboration with the universities and strong program with universities to get PhD students and master students and everybody else involved in the process, and also the participation financially of the public sector to speed up a lot of those innovations.
Thank you. That's I suppose, that's food for thought. I mean, we've been lucky to have a broad range of people involved in the development of the strategy, including Professor Philip O'Reilly from UCC. So we're starting, but we definitely need to continue to push on in that agenda. Ruth, just to turn to you for one question before I ask everyone a final question. I mean, in terms of success for us, we're launching the strategy this week, and while that feels like success now, it is success of a kind, but we need to crack on and deliver on it now. So, I mean, in terms of what success looks like for us, what will you be looking out for over the next 12 months and beyond?
Sure, I just want to echo the compliments to Philip and the team in UCC. In FEXCO, we've been collaborating with the researchers from UCC on areas such as digital currency and data, which has been incredibly fruitful, and we're looking forward to more of that. On the topic of what we should expect in the next year, now that we have our plan outlined that's going to go to government and actions are going to be incorporated into the Ireland for Finance Action Plan. So they are allocated against agencies and bodies, and the outcomes are measurable, which is very important to ensure that the work and ideas are actually realised and brought forward to real outcomes for the industry. So in the next year, we can expect more work on all of the 5 pillars. I'd love to say that the access to capital pillar is going to result in a big windfall of money for the sustainable finance industry, but perhaps others might be able to sort that out, maybe AIB. But I think that's really what we're going to see, the recommendations being incorporated into the Department of Finance action plan. We're going to see more job creation in the area of sustainable finance. We're going to see more cooperation between big players and FinTechs in this area in particular. And as we can see from what's coming out of the European Commission, there's a very sustained drive for green finance to actually attain credibility in all parts of financial services. And I think Ireland is going to be a key player in that.
Great, thanks, Ruth. And we're running slightly ahead of time, so I'm going for an impromptu question for all of our panel before we wrap up, if that's okay. Not that you're expecting this. So I suppose, Johnny, I'll start with you first. Just, I suppose, if we kind of sit here in 12 months' time, I mean, you know, what do you hope that we'll have achieved in terms of this area? Probably it'll be the same question to everyone. And Ruth, I'll probably leave you to wrap up again to pick one of those points. But, you know, I suppose, like, where do we need to go? Like, you know, what would you like to see us really succeed on in the next 12 months?
I'd like to see people really understand the difference between what is a commodity service in the market and what is truly competitive advantage. Because if people are going around spending money on individual commodity services for themselves, then they're actually wasting money that could go into really productive areas to accelerate the transition. So anybody who's trying to struggle with this idea of how do I collaborate, the first thing is try and establish what your business problems are, where are they ranked? Are you going for something which everybody else wants? In which case, try and do it at 10% of the cost by collaborating. If it's something that is a real competitive advantage, going to differentiate you, then you make that investment internally, you work with whomever, but allocate that capital properly, because a lot of people are allocating capital to what is really a commodity service. And it's totally wasteful for themselves, for their shareholders, and it's actually going to delay their own shift to a more profitable and sustainable future. So that's the key thing for me. Separate what is truly commoditized versus what is value add.
Excellent. Thanks, Johnny. Glad I asked this question. So Yvonne, over to you next.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think that's, you know, the amount of work that needs to be done, there isn't enough time to get it done if we're trying to battle it individually. And there is a huge appetite, as Ruth and Queen said, in terms of collaborating across banks domestically and internationally. So that's really great. I would say just then to add to that, in terms of, you know, making Ireland a leader in this space, you know, like the skill-led model, I think, is really unique in terms of the amount of funding and support that's provided in terms of getting the research and development, getting training, you know, even to get the courses developed, you know, you can get a huge portion of that funded, and obviously the participants taking part in the course, you know, again, huge supports in terms of the cost being covered. And there is a huge I suppose, training need at all levels, you know, for the experts, you know, whether it's in risk, whether it's in procurement, supplier management, client engagement, data, every part of the organisation, whether large or small, is going to need to get upskilled on ESG. And that training piece, if we can really push on, and I think the Sustainable Finance SkillNet has done a huge amount of work in developing courses in this space, so I'd recommend everyone to go and check that out. And there's a retail banking report that is about to be published that's linked in with all the banks and education bodies and trade bodies to try and understand what the training needs are and to make sure we have the right courses available to really, you know, press on and accelerate that learning. So training, collaboration is definitely two for me.
In case you're going to come to me next for the same question, so yeah, it's going to become difficult to differentiate at this stage. But I would say this, The pace of innovation on sustainable finance has accelerated dramatically over the past perhaps 18 months. And we'd expect that it will continue accelerating. And the type of work that is being done on the FinTech group here in Ireland is dramatically important to continue accelerating. There are very significant problems to be solved, and there is capital available here, but there's also capital available internationally, waiting to figure out where are the projects that are worth investing in to resolve some of those issues, knowing that these are very complex issues and that, for instance, climate has an impact on social and social has an impact on other things. So we need to take all of this into account. I think success in the next 12 months will be to ensure that more capital is being allocated to projects supported with relevant data and backing evidence to provide comfort that these investments are in the right place. I think that is really important. I think we spent the last 18 months looking at opportunities, and internationally there are many programs that have been put in place in the past 12 months. Now we need to execute, and we need to start delivering on trustworthy data that supports the capital allocation to those projects.
Excellent, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, and you know, Yvonne just gave the SkillNet Ireland plug, so I won't do that, but thank you very much. I think for me, I'd like to see, you know, an increase in a thriving ecosystem of fintech companies, you know, adding a lot of value to the economy here in Ireland, but also internationalizing their models, servicing the bigger organizations and partnering with government policy and the big kind of mega trends that we're seeing to help solve some of the challenges we have, either through sustainable finance or through other sorts of instruments, issuance, and development of products that really kind of have a material value into the economies of the world, not just Ireland. So I'd like to see more unicorns produced here in Ireland and more big mega companies come out of the economy here and through the investment. I'd like to see a continuation of investment and, you know, and a continuation of innovation. And hopefully we can play a role in developing the talent in order to do that, and stay ahead of the curve and always look to the future of what the industry is going to need. And I think forums like this are very important because you can learn a lot about what companies are thinking and talking about and planning, and we can join them and collaborate in that with that effort.
Thanks. And Ruth, sorry, over to you for the last word.
Yeah, everything that everybody else said, obviously. I think this is really a good opportunity to ask people who may be watching at the moment who aren't connected in with all of the relevant networks to do so now, because we're about to enter a period of very dramatic change. The industry is going to increase in terms of the quality of the data available to it and the credibility of the information it's providing, and therefore it's going to see a significant influx of investment per the plans that are already made, Corinne, which we know need to be progressed. So if you're involved in FinTechs, if you're currently involved in research, make sure that you're well networked in this industry, that you're on top of the changes that are occurring, that you're taking advantage of any learning and development that might be available to you, because we cannot underestimate the scale or the pace of the change that's going to occur in climate finance over the next few years.
Brilliant, thanks Ruth. And I mean, if it falls to me now to wrap up this session, and I suppose firstly a big thank you to all of you. Thank you, Johnny, Yvonne, Corinne, Mark, Ruth. You've been fantastic panelists, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us over the last hour or so. I mean, as Ruth said, you know, I recommend that people would get hold of the strategy. I mean, you know, you'd have a look, and if there are areas that you particularly want to engage with or you haven't engaged with yet, I mean, please feel free to reach out to us. I suppose I would like to close with a big thank you to Colette Coogan and to Michael Concannon, Colette from Sustainable Finance Ireland, and Michael, who we saw earlier, FinTech and Payments Association of Ireland, who we've worked with so closely to deliver this strategy, which I suppose is the first step as we look forward to next year. So thank you all for tuning in this afternoon, and thanks to my panelists for a wonderful discussion, and we hope to engage with you all on this subject as we go through the next year. So thanks everyone, and have a good afternoon.